Now, with the knowledge about factory functions or factory decorators, we can do quite interesting stuff. We could create a new decorator factory with template, for example. And there I expect to get a template, which should be some string, and a hook ID, which should also be a string. And then here I return my anonymous function, which is the actual decorator, as you learned, because again, I have a decorator factory. And in there, I want to render some template, which should be some HTML code, into some place in the DOM where I find this hook ID. So now we can go to index.html and add such a place so that we can see that this works. We can add a div here with an ID of app maybe. And then in app.ts, instead of logger, I add with template. Let's pass an empty string as a first argument for now and app as a second argument. So this ID I assign to the div here. And now inside of that inner function, so our actual decorator, inside of this decorator function, I want to reach out to the element, to the hook element with document get element by ID. For the hook ID, we're getting here as an argument. And if hook L is a thing that exists, then I want to access its inner HTML and set this equal to template, let's say. A very simple setup, of course, but this should do the trick. Now, I'm not interested in the constructor, and to tell TypeScript that I'm not interested here, I can add an underscore as a name, which basically signals to TypeScript, yeah, I know I get this argument, but I don't need it. I have to specify it though. So with this underscore, I tell you that I'm aware of it, but that I won't use it. Because all I want to do for now is I want to render this here. So now when we add with template here we could add a h1 tag, my person object like this, also close it. And if we now save that, it compiles without errors, and indeed, here you see this was rendered on the screen. And this hopefully shows you the power you have with decorators. You can build really advanced decorators like this one, which all of a sudden does some magic behind the scenes. And that is what I mean with meta programming. We add some logic here, which we could expose if this would be a third-party library we share with our users. We could expose this as part of the library, and anyone who uses our library can import this decorator function and add it to a class to then magically render some content all of a sudden. And of course, you're not even limited to that. If you would want to output the name, which is part of the class when it gets instantiated, you can do that as well. We get our constructor function here after all. Now what we can do with that is we can create a new person here by calling our constructor, because that is our constructor function here after all. Let me convert this to any so that TypeScript allows this and doesn't think it's a normal function. And then we could go to our hook element and query for a h1 tag, which we of course in practice will not always have, but for demo purposes I assume we will always have one here. Whoops, and I should also close the h1 tag down there now that I see it. And then here, with an exclamation mark, again assuming that we always find a h1 element, we can set the text content equal to p.name. And if I do that and save this, now I output the name, which is part of the object here in the template. So this is something you can do, and of course you can write way more elaborate decorators than I'm doing it here. Consider Angular, a very popular framework that uses TypeScript. They use decorators, like this component decorator, to allow you to pass in an object where you specify things like the template for this component and the selector in the DOM where this template should be rendered. This is relatively close to what we defined here, a template and then a place where it should be rendered. Now, needless to say, the Angular decorators are of course way more advanced and elaborate than our basic decorator here. Nonetheless, the core idea is the same. Angular gives you the decorators here so that you can specify some HTML code which can be connected to your component class that will be rendered to the DOM when this component gets rendered. Now, in case you don't know how Angular works, that's not a problem. You just have to understand here that it works with classes and decorators, and then it does basically what we did here. So that's one of the things you can do with decorators, or specifically here with decorator factories, because that allows us to pass in that extra config which we need here. And that's also what I meant with meta programming. We're creating things, we're creating decorator functions which you might say have some impact on the end user. In the end, we do render something on the screen here, but we do that with a tool which we expose to other developers, because this decorator is such a tool which other developers have to use by adding it to a class in this example. Otherwise, this would do nothing. So we provide extra utilities to developers which the other developers can use to, for example, conveniently render something on the screen for a given class. That's the same thing Angular does here in a more advanced way, and it is something decorators are perfect for.